I parked on the curb across from the house, pie dish warm in my hands, wrapped in an old kitchen towel. The driveway was full, just like old times, but the gate, tall and glossy, didn't budge when I tapped in the code. I tried again. Slower. The screen flashed red. Access denied. I stood there, blinking at the numbers. Had Dean changed it and forgotten to tell me it had happened once before? But he'd called that time, laughed it off, said Brooke was always updating the system. This time, there had been no call. I reached for my phone, but there was no signal on the narrow hill, so I waited. The wind pulled gently at the hem of my coat, and the towel started slipping from the edges of the dish. I adjusted it just as the front door opened. Brooke stepped out in heels and a sharp ivory coat, holding a mimosa like a prop in one hand. "Idella," she said, not unkindly, but with something rehearsed in her tone. "What are you doing here, brunch?" I said. "Dean invited me last week." She sipped her drink slowly, eyes scanning the driveway like I wasn't the main thing standing there. Then she said it soft, firm, final. "We don't want poor people here." She didn't wait for a response, just turned and shut the door, the latch clicking into place louder than the wind in the trees. I didn't move. Not right away. The pie dish had gone cold in my hands. The gate stood tall, unyielding. Behind it, laughter drifted through the open upstairs windows, someone clinking glasses, someone shouting about reservations. The towel slipped fully from the pie and dropped to the ground. I didn't bend to pick it up. Instead, I turned, slowly, and walked back to my car. As I opened the door, the wind picked up the corner of my scarf, carrying it down the street like it belonged to someone else. I didn't chase it. I had something else to retrieve. The door to my apartment stuck again. I had to lean my shoulder into it before it gave, groaning the way old things do when they've been asked to hold on just a little longer. Inside, the quiet was sharp. No ticking clock, no dog padding across the floor, no sounds from upstairs, just the kind of silence that makes you aware of every breath you take. I set the pie dish on the counter without bothering to unwrap it. The crust had cracked. I pulled my coat off slowly and hung it on the hook by the door. The wall behind it was flaking again. I'd been meaning to repaint it, but the joints in my fingers had been making that promise harder to keep. I sat down in the chair by the window. The same view I'd had for 5 years, a back alley, 3 trash bins, and the edge of someone else's yard. Once, I would have scoffed at it. Now, it just looked like something I had to accept. When Charles passed, Dean had come to me with spreadsheets and worry in his voice, said the company needed streamlined leadership, that I shouldn't have to deal with board meetings and signatures, that he'd take care of everything. So I signed. The house, the car, the company shares, all of it. I moved into this place the following spring, telling myself it would only be for a year, maybe 2. Then time passed in strange ways. Holidays skipped, calls shortened, visits scheduled, then quietly forgotten. I became mom in text messages and Idella in person. Formal, measured, almost polite. But something about the way Brooke looked at me today, like a stain on her porch, did more than sting. It tilted something loose inside me. Something I didn't know I'd been protecting all this time. I looked over at the old bookshelf Charles built before the business had taken off. Behind a row of cookbooks was a drawer only I ever opened. And suddenly, I needed to see what was still waiting inside it. I hadn't opened the drawer in years. The cookbooks slid forward with a soft thump as I pulled them aside. Revealing the recessed panel behind, I pressed gently on the backboard, and the wood popped outward with a faint click. The wooden box was still there. Plain, square, no markings. The kind of thing you'd overlook unless you knew where to look. Charles had built it himself back when everything we touched still felt like ours. I carried it to the table and lifted the lid. Inside, everything was just as I'd left it. A faded envelope with my name in his handwriting. A small metal key. And a red-sealed folder I had almost forgotten existed. The envelope opened with a whisper. His note was short. You were always the builder. I just drove the truck. This trust is yours just in case our son forgets where he came from. I unfolded the folder next. Legal documents. Registered out of state. Some barely touched by time. The language was dry. Exacting Charles had always said the best power doesn't shout. It just waits. At the bottom of the stack was the original certificate of incorporation for the parent entity of our logistics firm. The name on the ownership line was still mine. My maiden name, inked in a quiet typewriter font, Idella Monroe. All those years ago, Charles had created a secondary structure, a trust with controlling interest in the company's intellectual property, vehicles, and warehousing systems. Something separate from the everyday operations. Something that had never been legally folded into Dean's restructuring. No one had ever asked, and I'd never offered. I had let them think I'd stepped away from everything, but this had waited. I stared at the key in my palm, remembering the storage unit Charles kept in New Hampshire. Just a nondescript box off the highway, locked tight even when we didn't visit for years. I slid the key into my coat pocket. If the paperwork here was real, and I knew it was, I'd need someone to help me prove it. And I knew exactly who to call. Ruth didn't ask why I called. She just told me to come in. Same building she'd worked in since her hair was still chestnut instead of silver. The office hadn't changed much either. Still smelled like lemon oil and old case files. She took the folder without a word, flipping through the documents with practiced fingers. Her glasses slid down her nose as she leaned in closer to examine the signatures. When she looked up again, her face had lost all softness. These are still active, she said, tapping the trust. And this was never voided. You have controlling interest in the parent entity. Idella, legally. I nodded. What about Dean's filings? She opened a separate folder on her screen, pulling up the records. Her fingers froze. There's a supplemental transfer here, filed 2 years after Charles passed. It lists your name, but not your signature. They even used a different notary, one I've flagged before. So they forged it. Her mouth tightened. Looks that way. The air between us shifted. For a moment, Ruth wasn't just my lawyer. She was the only person in the world who still saw me as more than someone's mother. She adjusted her glasses and sat back. You want to press charges? I looked out the window. Below, traffic moved like nothing had changed, maybe for the world. It hadn't. No, I said quietly. Not yet. I want the truth to stand on its own. Let them explain it when it's already too late to change course. She nodded slowly. Then we start with a reinstatement. You're still the primary stakeholder. That gives you access to everything, to the board, the accounts, the audits, even the building keys. I exhaled. She closed the folder. I'll make the calls. I stood, steadier than I'd felt in weeks. As I reached the door, Ruth spoke again. I remember when you used to come in with Charles. You were the one asking the hard questions. You always were. I smiled. Then let's give them a few of their own. And by the time I stepped back into the cold, I had already made the first one. The call came mid-morning. I was making tea, phone tucked under my ear, half listening as Dean launched into one of his overly cheerful openings. Hey, Mom, how are you? Everything okay over there? It always started like that, now light, distant, as if we hadn't known each other our whole lives. I'm fine, I said. Just checking in on that brunch. I didn't hear back after last weekend. He hesitated. Just a beat too long? Yeah, about that. Brooke's been swamped planning this gala. It's taken over the whole calendar. I was thinking, maybe we push dinner to next month. That way it's quieter. More time for us to actually talk. Next month? I repeated, letting the words land. Yeah, he said quickly. Just better timing. You know, these events get crazy. And Brooke's under a lot of pressure. I heard Brooke in the background laughing, giving someone directions. Then music, clinking glass. They were in the middle of something. Dean lowered his voice. Anyway, I'll swing by the store this week. Pick up your groceries. Restock whatever you're low on. Text me a list. I didn't answer right away. He filled the space with a nervous chuckle. Thought that might help. I know Social Security's not much. Just let me take care of it. Okay. I thanked him out of habit. We said goodbye. I stared at the phone in my hand for a long time after the line went dead. Dinner next month? A grocery list? As if that made up for pretending I didn't exist when guests were around. He wasn't being cruel, at least. Not in his mind. That was the worst part. Dean thought he was being kind, but kindness without respect is a quiet form of cruelty. I sat down with a pad of paper, meant to write the list he asked for. Instead, I reached for the red-sealed folder. There was no appetite left in me for charity, only the appetite for truth. And I was ready to serve it cold. I didn't turn on the lights when I came home. The apartment held enough dim glow from the street lamps to find my way to the table, where the red-sealed folder waited like a reminder I could no longer push aside. I set my purse down, placed both hands on the worn wood surface, and let the silence settle. Then I reached for the old envelope, the one with Charles's handwriting, the one marked, "For when things change." I slid a finger under the flap. The paper inside was thin, folded twice, soft at the creases. His handwriting tilted slightly, the way it always did when he wanted to sound reasonable but was bracing for trouble. Some inherit money. You inherit the last word. Use it wisely. I read it twice. Then a third time. It didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like recognition of what he believed I could do and what he feared our son might one day forget. The trust documents lay beside the letter, the signature pages, the hidden structure of the parent entity, the stock distributions, all of it untouched for years, waiting for someone to remember it existed, waiting for me. I picked up my phone before I could talk myself out of it. Ruth answered on the first ring. "Idella, it's time," I said. She didn't ask what I meant. "All right. Are you certain I am—" "Activate the trust." A pause one she allowed, only because she knew I wasn't impulsive. "And the board," she asked. "Contact them." I said. "All of them." I could hear her typing. "I'll schedule an emergency review. Once the trust is in play, your authority is immediate." Authority? I hadn't heard that word in my direction in a long time. "Thank you. Ruth, we'll proceed first thing in the morning." I hung up, resting the phone beside the open letter. Outside. A car passed, its headlights sweeping briefly across the wall, then vanishing just as quickly. The apartment fell still again, but the quiet didn't press on me this time. It opened. Everything that had been stripped from me had left a space. Now I knew exactly how to fill it. The board met on a Thursday, not in some sleek downtown tower, but in the same conference room Charles and I had helped design 2 decades ago. Plain walnut walls, no windows, and a clock that had never kept time properly. Most of them were still there. Men and women who'd stood beside us when the company was just an idea scribbled on napkins. A few newer faces, 2 recruited after Dean took over. All sharp suits and careful language. When I walked in, the room went still. A pause too long to be polite. Some stood. A few didn't know whether to. Ruth handed out the documents before I said a word. The trust, the ownership chain, the unbroken authority they had all somehow forgotten or never been told still existed. I let them read in silence. One of the older board members, Glenn, finally looked up. 60%, he said, his voice low, almost cautious. "Yes," I replied. "Never dissolved, never sold. Just waiting." Someone on the end cleared her throat. But the daily operations, Dean, I'm not here to run trucks or chase invoices. I said, I'm here because the foundation this company was built on has cracked, and I won't let it collapse just so someone else can polish the surface. We voted. No one objected. One abstained. Eyes low. I was reinstated with a single stroke of the pen. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like correction. After the meeting, Ruth and I stayed behind. We went over the next steps: security permissions, asset freezes, public filings. She suggested press releases. I declined. This wasn't about making noise. It was about standing quietly where they thought I'd vanished. I asked for a list of upcoming events, appearances, investor meetings. She tapped her tablet, eyes narrowing. There's a gala this Saturday, she said. Dean and Brooke are hosting. High profile. I nodded. Good, I said. I think it's time I attended something festive. And this time, I wouldn't be waiting at the gate. The wind at the top of the hill carried music from the house, soft jazz. The clinking of glasses. Laughter that didn't belong to anyone I recognized anymore. I stood just outside the gate. Alone at first. Watching the lights shimmer through the high windows. Brooke's voice broke through the air like a bell. She was standing on the marble steps, one arm raised with that same polished posture she wore at fundraisers and photo ops. Only invited guests passed the gate. She called. She didn't see me yet. Not really. She saw a figure in the dark and assumed I'd disappear quietly. Like always, I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The first black limousine pulled up behind me. The driver stepped out, circled to open the rear door. Glenn emerged, straight-backed in a charcoal suit, nodding at me with the kind of respect that comes from shared years, not headlines. Then another, and another. Limousine doors opened in rhythmic procession, like a row of dominoes rising instead of falling. 18 in total. Attorneys, shareholders, senior board members. Every single one of them had RSVP'd to my invitation. Not Brooks. The security guard at the gate looked from them to me, his eyes wide. He stepped aside without a word. I walked forward slowly, flanked on either side by the people who had once helped build something out of nothing with Charles and me. There were no banners, no applause, no cameras, just the quiet sound of leather shoes on stone and heels on gravel. Brooke stood frozen as we approached. Her smile faltered. She turned slightly, scanning the line of arrivals behind me, names she hadn't expected, faces she didn't recognize as allies. Dean stepped out from the entryway, confusion settling fast across his face. I didn't stop at the steps. I didn't raise my voice or make an entrance speech. I simply walked past them both and into the house I helped build without a key, without permission. Without fear. The only thing louder than their silence was the truth that followed me inside. Dean met me near the bar. A stiff smile stretching across his face like it might still work. He reached for my arm, not to embrace, but to steer. Mom, he whispered, you can't just, this isn't the time. Let's talk privately. Okay. We'll figure something out. Behind him, Brooke was already circling the guests, her voice airy, pretending the evening hadn't shifted. I watched her take a flute of champagne from a tray and raise it as if to toast something, anything other than the reality marching through the doors. The lead attorney handed Dean the documents, a small stack, neatly bound, each page marked with precision. Frozen assets, pending investigation, misuse of company authority, falsified transfer filings. Dean's smile collapsed mid-sentence. He scanned the first page, then the second, before looking up at me like a man realizing the roof had already fallen in. This isn't fair, he muttered. You don't understand how complicated it got. I understand exactly, I said. You forgot who taught you to build a business in the first place. Brooke rushed over, eyes darting between the board members, now dispersing into smaller, serious conversations. "We can fix this," she said, teeth clenched behind her lipstick. "We can manage the optics, spin the story. You don't have to make it public. It already is." I replied, "You did that when you made me invisible." Outside, cameras began flashing. Someone had tipped off the press. The same photographers Brooke had once invited to document ribbon cuttings and charity auctions were now capturing the unraveling. Security approached quietly. Not harsh, just final. Dean didn't resist. Brooke stared at them like they'd gotten the wrong address. I didn't gloat. I didn't stop walking. The air outside was cold, but it didn't cut like it used to. A black car waited by the curb, engine humming softly. The driver opened the door without a word. I paused for just a moment and looked back. Not at the house, not at them, but at the space they had tried to fill with silence. It hadn't held, and now I had one more place left to visit. The apartment felt different in the weeks that followed, still small, still aging, but no longer heavy. The quiet settled like a soft blanket instead of a warning. I could breathe in it again. Most mornings, I made tea and read through updates from the new executive team. They moved quickly, decisively, without the strain of ego. The company didn't wobble under the transition the way I'd once feared it might. If anything, it stood straighter. Operations tightened. Morale lifted. Old employees who had felt pushed aside wrote to say they'd finally been heard. I didn't respond to the messages right away. Gratitude takes time to place. Loss does too. One Saturday, I packed an overnight bag and drove north toward the lake. The roads narrowed into long curves bordered by pine and open sky. The cabin came into view the way memories do, slowly at first. Then all at once. Charles bought the place before Dean was born, told me it was for when we need a little space from the world. He had left it to me quietly, long before anyone imagined we'd need it for anything more. Inside, the air still held faint traces of old firewood. I lit a lamp, dusted the table, and opened the windows to let in the breeze. For the first time in a long while, I felt him there, not as a ghost, but as a companion to the quiet. I took out a fresh sheet of paper that evening, not for Dean, not for Brooke, but for Nora, my granddaughter, a girl still untouched by pretense, who once drew pictures of trucks on her birthday cards because she thought the company belonged equally to all of us. I wrote her a letter she won't need for years, about her grandfather, about beginnings, about what to do when someone tries to shrink you down to fit their comfort. I folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer beside Charles's old pen. The lamp flickered once before steadying. Outside, the lake was still, holding the reflection of everything that remained. I closed the cabin door behind me, feeling the weight of the world shift into its proper place.